Hi everybody, it's Leela from Miss Kiss Creations. Today's video, I'm going to show you how I created this glittered alcohol ink tumbler. This tumbler is a 2.0 version of my original alcohol ink tumbler. This tumbler may look familiar to y'all. I wanted to not only go over this type of tumbler again, but answer a lot of those questions that I've had over the years from all of my beginner viewers. And don't worry, I will have this tutorial in my description below. So like I said, I've answered a lot of specific questions that I've received over the years from my viewers. So that's why this video's a little longer than what I typically have. So if there's any parts of this video that you already know, just go ahead and skip right past those parts. Like always, all of my materials will be listed in my description below, including some links and coupon codes. And for all of my beginner viewers, I will have a list of my help tutorials in my description below as well. With all that being said, let's go ahead and get started on this tumbler. I'm starting out with a 20-ounce stainless steel tumbler for Maker Flow Crafts. I have sanded my tumbler down with a 180 grit sanding block. After I sanded my tumbler down, I then wiped it down with 91% alcohol. The reason why we like to prep our tumblers is just so that epoxy will give a good stick on that tumbler. So if you do not especially wipe your tumbler down with 91% alcohol, your epoxy is going to start repelling. Repelling means not sticking to the tumbler. So if you ever have spots on your tumbler where the epoxy is spreading, that means you did not prep your tumbler properly. And then I took a flat spray paint and I sprayed it with a color black. You can use a gloss, flat, or satin. It does not have to be flat. I just have flat on hand. I do not recommend putting glitter right on the stainless steel, only because if you think about it like painting a car or like doing nails, you always have to have that buffer, you know, have that nice rough surface and not that shiny surface so the paint can stick to that tumbler. I'm first going to apply some glitter to my tumbler. This is my Mod Podge. I am using the Mod Podge method only so I don't have to wear my PPE mask and you guys can hear me better. The Mod Podge that I have is just clear Mod Podge. It doesn't matter if it's dishwasher Mod Podge or the orange container, as long as it dries clear. You can also apply your glitter using your epoxy method or spray adhesive method. All of my glitters are from Glitter Heart Co. I will have their link and a coupon code in my description below. I'll be using Black Beauty, Poodle Skirt, Cool Water, and Deja Vu. I do have a silicone mat to protect my surface, just in case I get things everywhere, which I probably will because I always do. I place some Mod Podge inside of my painter's tray and I use a sponge brush and I just apply my Mod Podge around my tumbler. This is going to be a very random glitter placed on my tumbler, so I don't want this to be perfect. So do not worry, you cannot mess this part up. I'm just dipping my sponge brush into my Mod Podge and then applying my Mod Podge around my tumbler. I'm just going to leave my tumbler on the cup turner for this, just so I don't have to worry about taking it off the cup turner and placing it back on. But you can apply your Mod Podge whichever way you like, whichever is easiest for you. I'm not really worried about the thickness or the thinness of the coat of Mod Podge, only because I just want to make sure all that Mod Podge is covered on the tumbler and not missing any part of that tumbler. I'm not going to focus on the bottom yet. I'm just going to do that at the end. I always like to do that towards the end, either mix up my glitter or just place random glitter on the bottom. So we'll move on to that when I'm finished with this part. Now that I have my Mod Podge placed on my tumbler, I have my catch paper underneath my tumbler and I'm going to start with my Black Beauty. And remember, I told y'all this is going to be a random effect. And so I'm placing this glitter wherever I just feel like placing it. So this is not going to be anything perfect. I want to make sure that for me personally, I want to make sure I'm applying more black glitter than the other color glitters, only because I want the base to be more black. And this black glitter is actually holographic, so it still has that nice color to it. It's not just solid black. And if you get some on the bottom of your tumbler, don't worry about it. It's not going to stick if you don't have any Mod Podge on there. So just randomly around that tumbler, leaving some spots just for the other colors. And like I said, I'm leaving small spots. I want to make sure this base is more black than the other colors that I chose. Pat on my tumbler arm to get any excess glitter off and place that glitter back into its container. And now going in with my blue, which is the cool water, and placing that in small areas of the tumbler. Now remember that back is black, so it's going to show up a little darker than it would if it was on a white base, which is completely okay. That's the look I want to go for. And I am doing this in small areas only because I can always add more. You can never take away. I mean, I guess you could if you stripped your tumbler, but it's easier to add more later than take away. So I think I'm going to go in and add more black after I add these colors because I want to make sure that black is really popping. So you see the small amounts of blue I added to that tumbler. And while that Mod Podge is still wet, I'm going to go in with my Black Beauty one more time and just add more black to the tumbler. You try to do this in more, obviously do this more fast and slow because your Mod Podge is on your tumbler and you have less time than if you were doing the epoxy method. So keep that in mind. I always like to put, not too thick, but a thicker than thinner coat of Mod Podge on my tumbler so I have more time to work with it. But if you're using the epoxy method, then take your time with this. You know, epoxy dries a lot slower than Mod Podge does. So I kind of want that blue like placed over the black, those other colors, and not so much like chunks, if that makes sense. So that's why I'm covering this up more with my black. And play with this, you know, go back and forth with your colors. You don't have to place all the black down at one time or the blue down at one time. Really play with this and make this tumbler your own, and I'm sure it's going to look beautiful. So I'm just tapping off that excess glitter one more time and placing that glitter back into its container, and then moving on to my poodle skirt and doing the same thing, placing that poodle skirt in little areas of that tumbler, either on top or just around that black area. Just little pops just to bring out some color. This is going to pop really well, I think, with those alcohol inks. And I think it's going to look cute. Okay, so we just have that pink in there, just little specks, nothing too crazy. If you want to put crazy colors in yours, go for it. I'm sure it's going to look great, but I just want that poppiness. And now I'm moving back to that Black Beauty and adding more of that black in here. You can always add more, so it is okay that I keep going back and forth. No pressure. And if I do get some over that blue or pink, that's okay. This is going to be one of those random cups, and these are actually my favorite type of tumblers because you know, you really can't mess these up. So that's the great part about this. You really cannot go wrong with these tumblers. They are beautiful, and every single tumbler is going to look different. So if you guys do send me your tumblers via Facebook or Instagram, I know all of your tumblers are going to look different, but you're still gonna have that same, you know, type of tumbler. And I think I'm going to go in and add a little bit more pink here. If you do have a heavy hand, which I typically do, you can always transfer this glitter into a different container, like a 1 ounce measuring cup, or you can take it and pinch it like salt and just pinch it around the tumbler. Whichever way is easier for you. But since this is more random, if I dump it, then it accidentally gets dumped, then that's how it's going to be. So you can see those little pieces of that blue and pink just kind of popping through, but the main base is that black. Oops, and there it goes. So that's what I wanted. So now I'm going to focus on the bottom here. Taking my Mod Podge, and I just simply blot my Mod Podge on the bottom, and then I start painting the Mod Podge on. You could have done this bottom before while you did the whole cup. I just always like to do it towards the end, only because if I do have to take off my tumbler and kind of pat it on the surface, then I don't have to worry about messing up the bottom. So make sure you're just getting that full covered Mod Podge like I stated earlier about around the tumbler. Just make sure you're getting that all over the bottom. So I'm going to take off my tumbler off its cup turner for this and pat my tumbler like so, and you can see all that excess glitter that came out. Take that excess glitter, place it into another cup, and that's what I'm gonna be placing on the bottom for that base, because that's all of that excess glitter, meaning that's that pink, blue, and black glitter. And then just placing it right on the bottom like I do with all of my tumblers. I like to focus more on the edge, and then it falls right down towards the center there. Just doing a full cover tumbler. And like I always say, this is your tumbler, so if you want to make this glitter, add some sparkle to it, or add some blue or pink, whatever is easiest for you and whatever you prefer. So here is my tumbler so far. I love how this is turning out so far. Look at that beautiful black beauty glitter with that holographic hue. This is gorgeous. We're going to let this dry for about 30 minutes. Make sure that Mod Podge is completely dry. If you're using another method, make sure your epoxy is completely dry underneath. After 30 minutes, I'll see you with the next step. Welcome back, everybody. It's been about 30 minutes since I've placed my Mod Podge and my glitter on the tumbler. Just for all my beginner viewers, I did not spin my turner while I air dried my Mod Podge. If you were using the epoxy method, then you would have to spin your turner, because the epoxy, the gravity will take over with the epoxy and it'll run down. So I just left my tumbler on its turner just like this to air dry my Mod Podge. Now for my next step, I want to make sure I seal in this glitter, because when I apply my epoxy to my tumbler, this glitter isn't going to be sealed and it will spread all around the tumbler and move. So I want this to be exactly how it is when I apply my epoxy. I'm going in with my Krylon Crystal Clear acrylic coating. I will have this linked in my description. I spray about 2 generous coats of this acrylic coating all around my tumbler. I also spray this after I do the epoxy method or the spray adhesive method. I know a lot of people don't spray this if they do apply their glitter with the epoxy method, but I like to always give it a couple coats just to be sure that all of my glitter is locked in on my tumbler. And this takes about another 15 to 20 minutes to dry on your tumbler. So I'm gonna go outside, spray this on my tumbler, and then I'll see y'all with that next step. All right, everybody, my tumbler's Mod Podge dried and I sprayed it with my acrylic sealer coating. If I sound funny, it's because I have my face mask on, my proper PPE to protect me from the epoxy. The next step is placing the epoxy and the alcohol inks on my tumbler. I'm using 4 colors today for this tumbler, all from Holtz. Aquamarine, Wild Plum, Amethyst, and a white. You can use any brand white. I'm using Pinata white. If you do have any other brand white, go ahead and use that. You do need a white for this tumbler. You can use any color scheme you like, but make sure you have your white alcohol ink on hand. I get a lot of questions asking if you are able to use a mixative or this snow cap from Holtz. This is a thicker consistency than the alcohol inks, so I would not recommend using this. It is not going to make the design that I'm looking for today on your tumbler. And if you're completely clueless of what I'm talking about, it's okay. I'm going to demonstrate it and show y'all exactly how I achieved the look. I've mixed my epoxy in my cup and I am placing 30 milliliters of epoxy onto my tumbler. That's 15 milliliters part A and 15 milliliters part B, totaling 30 milliliters of epoxy. Turning on my cup turner and then placing all of my epoxy onto my tumbler. So this is a 20-ounce stainless steel tumbler. So if you're working with a 30-ounce stainless steel tumbler, I would recommend you placing 40 milliliters of epoxy on your tumbler. I just want to make sure I'm getting enough epoxy on my tumbler to be very thick, and make sure I have enough where when I apply a little bit of heat, those alcohol inks will swirl around. A lot of times people place not enough epoxy on their tumbler and their inks don't swirl around. So I'd rather place more epoxy than less. So if you accidentally place a little bit more than 30 milliliters of epoxy in your tumbler, that's okay. As long as you place it on evenly, make sure that epoxy is placed on the tumbler evenly, and it's just spread all on around the tumbler and on the bottom here. When you place it in your tumbler, you're going to probably feel like you have placed too much epoxy in your tumbler. That's not going to be the case because we want those alcohol inks to really swirl around your tumbler. I'm going to finish applying this epoxy and then we'll move on with that next step. All of my epoxy has been placed on my tumbler. I'm going to take my heat gun and place a little bit of heat on my tumbler's epoxy. That's going to loosen up that epoxy some and let that epoxy really thin out and move around my tumbler. The heat gun that I have is from Counterculture. I'm going to place it on the high setting and just wave it around the tumbler a couple times, about 6 to 10 inches away from the tumbler. So just a little bit of heat. Now before I apply my alcohol inks on my tumbler, I want my tumbler to cool down a little bit. I get a lot of messages asking me why their alcohol ink spreads when they place their alcohol ink on their epoxy. Sometimes you place your alcohol ink on heated up epoxy, causing that alcohol ink to spread. Make sure you have all of your alcohol inks opened. I'm starting with my colored alcohol ink, so I'm going in with my Wild Plum first. What I'm going to do is place my Wild Plum and my other two colors on this tumbler. And I want to focus on placing it mostly on the black areas. So I want to make sure that the black areas are mostly covered. And so those blue and purple areas, or I'm sorry, the blue and the pink areas peek through a little bit. If I do get some on the blue and the pink area, I'm not going to panic too much. It's okay. It's going to all come together and look beautiful. So don't worry about if your alcohol inks spread. You're not going to see your alcohol ink pop through too much because you're going to place it on that white base or that black base. So it's okay. You can see that you can barely see my inks. That is completely fine. Just place those inks wherever around the tumbler, focusing more on the black area, and then it's going to pop here soon. So I placed the Wild Plum, I went to the Aquamarine, and now I'm placing the Amethyst. I'm placing 3 or 4 little dabs of the alcohol ink first, because remember, like I told you with the glitter, you can always add more, and it's harder to take away. I am placing some on the bottom, so don't forget your bottom. And if you can't see this on screen, in person, I can see all of the inks on my tumbler, so you can kind of gauge where you want another color to go. So if you have too much blue in one area or too much pink in one area, then go back and just add more. This tumbler is very hard to mess up, like I keep mentioning, so please don't overthink this and just make something beautiful. Now that I have all of my colored inks on my tumbler, I'm going in with my white ink. What I'm doing is placing my white ink over my colored inks so I can see where my colored inks are. I'm placing a dab of that all around the tumbler like so. It's going to look just like a dab and you're not going to really see too much, which is fine, but once it kind of swirls around and does its own thing, you're going to notice those swirls really take over and you're going to see the purple start poking through, the pink and that blue start poking through on that black tumbler. And make sure you're getting the bottom with the white as well. So going around and placing more white on the tumbler, just in random spots. And just because you've moved on to your white doesn't mean you can't go in and add more of the blue or the purple. Do keep in mind if you're using colors that don't mix well or don't complement together well, if you accidentally place this blue on the pink, it's going to change shades. So do keep that in mind that these alcohol inks do combine together and they do change shades. That's why I chose a good color scheme, so when they do kind of swirl together, it doesn't look bad and they, like I said, complement each other. Now you're going to see a lot of basically cells on your tumbler at first. That's okay. I'm going to go in with my heat gun again on high and apply a little bit of heat to my tumbler. I'm not going to be too close to my tumbler because I don't want that alcohol ink to start spreading. So remember what I told you, whenever you add that heat to your tumbler, to the alcohol ink, it's going to start spreading and making that design from swirly. So taking that heat, like I said, and placing it on the tumbler. And you're going to start noticing those inks start swirling more, taking more of my inks and placing them over the already placed alcohol inks. So if you see any white areas, just cover that up with that already placed ink and it should cover it up perfectly fine. And if they do mix, remember, that is okay. And going in with my purple and just covering up those white areas, or I should say the more faded areas. And then we can always add more if you want to add more inks, more swirls. You can add more and then add more white. It's really up to you how much ink and how much white ink you want to add to your tumbler. There's really no right or wrong way, and how much swirl you want to add to your tumbler. So I'm going to add more heat to this here soon once I add more ink. Completely up to you. The more heat that you add, the more swirly it's going to be. Taking my heat gun again and applying more heat. What I typically like to do is stop my cup turner, take my cup off the cup turner, and let those inks run up and down. So I stop my cup turner. For my cup turner here, I bought a key. It's called an R key. It's from Lowe's, and it looks like an R. I just stop my cup turner. I place my tumbler right side up. And once I see those inks start dripping, I then turn it upside down and let it sit upside down. If some of your epoxy does drip from your tumbler, do not stress about that. It's no big deal. It's going to go right back on the cup turner and spin, and you'll have an evenly distributed epoxy tumbler. So do this a couple times. You can even stop it and place it on its side like so. Whatever you would like to see your tumbler look like. And once you're finished with that, put your tumbler back on its turner, fasten it on, and then turn the cup turner back on. And you can see already, instead of those blobs, since I added some of that heat to it, it's turning to those swirls. So like I said before, if you add more heat, the blobs are going to turn more swirly. Just make sure you're not adding all that heat at one time. If you do, it's going to start to separate. I'm trying to find one to show y'all how it would look whenever it's separated. But if it does separate, all you have to do is apply more of the alcohol ink over top of it. For instance, that pink is kind of faded or separated. So let me wait until my tumbler goes back around. I'm going to apply some more pink over that and let that spin, and it's going to all come together. Just make sure you're doing all this before your epoxy dries on your tumbler. Now the cool thing about this is over time, so in about 2 hours, when I check on this tumbler, these designs and these swirls are going to change a little bit. So that's the cool thing about these tumblers. If you do notice your designs not changing, just keep adding that heat. Very little heat at a time. Don't add it all at once. Be patient with this tumbler. Let it spin for 10 to 15 minutes. Go off and do something. Come back and you'll see the designs look completely different whenever the heat really takes over. And if you want to add more ink to this tumbler, add more ink. If you want to add less, add more, add less. Just like what I said about those peaks of, or those pops of glitter, add whichever amount of glitter and ink to your tumbler and just really make it your own. So I'm going to let this spin for about 10 to 15 minutes and then I'll return to show y'all how it looks. My tumbler's been spinning for about 10 to 15 minutes and you can see how it's separated. It only being 10 to 15 minutes after I placed my epoxy on my tumbler's epoxy is still wet. So now I'm going to go in with some glitter. I'm using the Deja Vu that I mentioned earlier, along with Sweet Tart and Sugar and Spice. This part is completely optional. I'm just placing some of the glitter in random areas just to give the tumbler a little bit more dimension. And I'm just pinching that glitter with my finger like I would salt, going in with my sweet tart, throwing some on the bottom here, and just letting that glitter go wherever it lands on the tumbler. And now going in with sugar and spice. And once I'm finished applying all of my glitter to my tumbler, I'm going to allow my tumbler to spin on the cup turner for about 4 hours. After 4 hours, I'm then going to turn off my cup turner and then let my tumbler air dry or air cure for another 20 hours. So my total drying or curing time is 24 hours. So once my 24 hours is up, I'll see y'all with the next step. I just want to check in with you guys. I started adding a lot of glitter on my tumbler. So I went in with diamonds from Glitter Heart Co. and I'm taking that and I'm also pinching that like salt and just placing that randomly around the tumbler just to give it more glitter than ink. I really want these glitters to kind of like complement each other, and you can see that there's like layers of glitter. You have that first layer and then I have that second layer with the diamonds and those other chunky glitters above. So I think it's going to turn out really pretty. I wanted to stop and show y'all before it dries and show y'all kind of where I am with this. So I just had a heavy hand with that glitter, but that's okay. I'm just sprinkling it on like I would some salt and then letting my tumbler dry. So I'll see y'all soon. Welcome back, everybody. It's been over 24 hours since my tumbler's epoxy has been placed on my cup. Let's go ahead and take a look on how this tumbler turned out. And look how beautiful it is so far. You can see I love how I added that last bit of diamonds on top. It kind of gave that tumbler a 3D effect or some more dimension and depth. And then let me show you the bottom here. For the next step, it all depends on how your tumbler turns out. So let me explain that further. So for my tumbler, I'm going to sand my tumbler, epoxy, add my decal, and epoxy again. The reason why I'm doing that is because my tumbler, I added glitter at the end, and there's still some glitter that's peeking through the epoxy, especially those fine pieces of glitter, the diamonds, and my tumbler is not as smooth as I want it to be. So if I were to add a decal to this tumbler now, I would be able to see kind of the bumpiness underneath the decal, and the decal won't lay flat. Now, if your tumbler turns out perfectly fine, if you didn't add that glitter on the end, if it's nice and smooth and you want to add your decal, I would just sand it a little bit here and there. There's nothing wrong with sanding a tumbler very lightly. Add that decal and then sealing in with epoxy. Another option, you can also sand it again. If you don't want to add your decal, just add that 10 milliliters of epoxy over your tumbler just to seal in all those inks. One question I get from a lot of my followers when using alcohol inks is, why is my tumbler so bumpy? Why is it sticking up some right here and it's flat right here? Well, you notice that I pointed to the alcohol ink spots. It's because this area with the alcohol inks, they tend to stay together and clump together, whereas this part has no alcohol ink, so it's going to be smoother than the ink area. Another reason why it's not as smooth or straight is because whenever you turn off your cup turner and you just let it sit with that epoxy wet and let it gravity take over, those inks and epoxy runs down, and then whenever you turn it, sometimes it just doesn't catch up to itself, and sometimes it doesn't lay as smooth as you would like. So I do have an area here that is a little bumpy. You can tell on camera here. My tumbler is not ruined, so do not freak out if that happens. I'm going to fast forward through these next steps just to save time with the video. Any of my beginner viewers, please look at my description below. There's plenty of videos to help you and guide you along your tumbler journey. everybody, my tumblers epoxy is completely cured on my tumbler, and you can see how gorgeous this tumbler looks when it is completely finished. Look at all of that glitter, and I absolutely love this decal on this tumbler. I think it completes it, and I think it'll be really cute with a name on the other side as well. You can see the bottom here. The only thing I have to finish up with this tumbler is the rim. If you are a beginner viewer, I will have one video posted in my description on how to clean the rim and the inside of your tumbler. Now that I've cleaned the rim and the inside of my tumbler is completely finished. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more tumbler and craft videos. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.